Sisters marry to cover up crime, but their bizarrely born twins destroy their criminal empire. Amidst the rugged mountains of California, where the gold rush of 1849 brought dreams of wealth mixed with the horrors of greed, there remains an inscribed stone that few dare to approach. Local gold miners whisper that it is cursed, and even the most intrepid historians avoid directly mentioning what it represents. The stone bears only the year 1868 and two names that once made the entire town tremble: Elias and Miriam Hawthorne. For nearly 2 decades, this brother and sister pair built an empire on blood and rumor, growing wealthy through deadly accusations and the seizure of innocent people's gold mines. But when their sinful marriage produced twins so deformed that doctors fled in horror, the townspeople whispered that a justice from the depths of hell had arrived. What truly happened in that isolated cabin, where 2 8-year-old children with twisted bodies but sharp minds plotted against their own parents, remains buried under layers of fear and superstition until now. Before we continue the story of the Hawthorne siblings and their horrific legacy, I want you to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, because stories like this, secrets most people want to forget, are exactly what we unearth here. Also, comment below what state or city you're listening from, as these dark tales are scattered all across America. The truth of the Hawthorne fortune and its cursed heirs reveals a level of calculated evil that makes even the most hardened observers question what humans are capable of when greed overwhelms conscience. California in the 1842 existed in a state of gold fever and economic chaos. Small towns like El Dorado Gulch, a settlement of about 500 souls nestled between rocky canyons and pine forests, survived on mining, trade, and an uneasy relationship with the superstitious beliefs that governed every aspect of life. Protestant doctrine and rumors of subterranean devils kept people ever wary of the gold curse, the belief that certain mines were possessed by demons, causing accidents and death. Elias Hawthorne, 30, with his angular face and cold blue eyes, would become a symbol of accusation and judgment. His sister Miriam, 27, was also harshly beautiful, with a sharp chin and an icy demeanor. But while Elias commanded attention with his powerful presence, Miriam manipulated through whispers and subtly planted suspicions. Both were better educated than was typical. Their father, a failed merchant from San Francisco, had taught them to read and write, and particularly about land and inheritance law. When their parents died of gold fever in 1845, leaving behind only a shack and a mountain of debt, they faced a bleak future like so many other migrants. But unlike their neighbors who dug desperately in the dirt, the Hawthorne siblings recognized an opportunity in the spreading fear of the mine curse. Western communities began hiring mine exorcists, self-proclaimed experts with special knowledge, to detect demon-possessed mines. They charged high fees and often received a share of the property confiscated from their victims. Their first clients were the mining village of Silver Creek, a 2-day ride away, where a series of cave-ins and disappearances had created an atmosphere ripe for supernatural explanations. Elias presented himself as an expert in the signs of a curse, while Miriam served as his assistant, adept at spotting devil's marks on the bodies of victims. Their method was simple but brutal: study the local distribution of wealth, then accuse the owners of the most valuable gold mines of being possessed by demons, leading to their confiscation and execution. The widow, Abigail Thorne, owner of a rich gold mine coveted by many prospectors, became their first victim. Under the Hawthorne's orchestration, Abigail was accused of causing a cave-in through a pact with the devil. The evidence they presented seemed overwhelming. Mysterious marks on her body, which they had secretly inflicted during a forced examination. Testimony from neighbors, carefully prompted by Miriam, who swore they had seen her muttering curses, and the damning fact that her mine continued to produce gold when others failed, which was actually due to its better location. Abigail Thorne was hanged on the 12th of October 1846, and her mine was divided between the town and the Hawthorne siblings as a service fee. But this was only the beginning of an empire that would last 16 years, spread to 10 communities, and kill 62 innocent people. Elias and Miriam's decision to marry was not born of affection, but of cold calculation. By 1858, They possessed assets worth over $20,000, a massive fortune at the time. They owned mines in multiple locations, held mortgages on dozens of farms, and kept detailed ledgers of their crimes. The problem they faced was inheritance and security. If either of them married an outsider, their spouse would have a legal claim to a portion of the assets and, more dangerously, potential access to the carefully guarded secrets that had built their fortune. Similarly, if one of them died without a direct heir, complex inheritance laws could lead to their property being divided among distant relatives or even seized by the state. Their solution demonstrated the same ruthless pragmatism that had defined their entire career. Elias, as the younger brother, would marry Miriam in a private ceremony performed by a corrupt minister they had bought off during an exorcism case. The marriage would be kept secret from the wider community. Instead, it was presented as a business partnership between a man and a single woman who had decided against marriage, who had dedicated their lives to protecting the community from supernatural threats. The secret wedding took place on the 21st of December 1858, on the winter solstice, a day chosen more for its symbolic significance than for any supernatural belief. The ceremony was held in the cellar of their log cabin, witnessed only by the corrupt minister and 2 slaves who had been threatened into silence. The wedding itself was a mockery of Christian tradition, performed not to honor love or spiritual union, but as a legal maneuver designed to protect their accumulated assets and shared secrets. The pregnancy that began in early 1859 seemed to confirm the siblings' confidence in their unholy arrangement. Miriam's condition progressed normally for the first few months, without any sign of complications or abnormalities. They had hired a skilled midwife from Sacramento, paying her an extraordinary fee to temporarily relocate to El Dorado Gulch and provide the best possible care. They ordered special foods, imported medicines, and even commissioned twin cradles crafted from the finest pine and lined with wool, befitting children destined to inherit a great fortune. But as Miriam's pregnancy entered its final trimester, subtle signs began to emerge that something was very wrong. The first indication appeared during the 7th month, when Miriam began to feel movements that the midwife described as unusual in their intensity and coordination. Clara Voss, the experienced midwife who had delivered hundreds of babies in her career, had never felt fetal movements like those occurring in Miriam's womb. Instead of the typical kicks and turns that characterized normal development, these movements seemed to involve multiple entities engaged in what could only be described as combat. "It's as if they're tearing at each other," Clara confided to her assistant, a young woman named Lena Schmidt. "I've delivered twins many times, but I've never felt such aggressive movements. It's almost as if they're trying to destroy each other." Elias dismissed these concerns as the superstitious imaginings of an old woman, but privately he began to worry. The siblings had invested too much in this pregnancy to accept that anything could go wrong, and Elias threw himself into research to explain and address any potential complications. He purchased every medical book available in San Francisco, corresponded with doctors in New York and Philadelphia, and even consulted with several midwives from other regions to gather information on difficult births and abnormal development. What he found in his research was both reassuring and deeply disturbing. Many texts confirmed that twin pregnancies often featured more intense fetal movements than single births, especially as the children competed for limited space and resources in the womb. But some sources also mentioned the increased risks associated with what they called close blood relations between parents, including higher rates of stillbirth, physical abnormalities, and mental deficiencies in surviving children. The birth, when it finally began on the 15th of April, 1860, lasted nearly 2 days and was marked by complications that would haunt Clara Voss for the rest of her life. The twins were immediately recognized as severely deformed, with limbs that grew at impossible angles, skulls that seemed to have developed extra bony protrusions, and bodies that appeared to be joined by bridges of connective tissue at the torso and possibly internal organs. What truly shocked the women present was the realization that these infants possessed a level of awareness and coordination that seemed to defy their apparent developmental stage. They moved with purpose, grasped objects placed near them, and appeared to communicate with each other through a series of sounds and gestures that neither midwife could explain. Despite their severe physical abnormalities, the twins displayed an intelligence that was both remarkable and deeply unsettling. The children, whom Elias and Miriam named Isabella and Sophia, elegant names that might mask some of the horror of their condition, survived the difficult birth and began to grow in ways that defied all expectations. By their first birthday, it was clear that their intelligence far outpaced normal developmental milestones, even as their physical limitations became more pronounced. The years from 1860 to 1868 marked both the peak of the Hawthorne siblings' power and the beginning of their greatest challenge. As Isabella and Sophia grew from infants to children, their unique combination of severe physical deformity and extraordinary intelligence created problems that went far beyond mere medical care. The girls, despite their unusual shared anatomy, required constant supervision and specialized attention that made it increasingly difficult to maintain their parents' public careers. By the time the twins turned 8 in March 1868, they had developed into something unprecedented in Gold Rush-era California. Severely disabled children who possessed the intellectual capabilities of educated adults. Though unable to walk normally or engage in typical childhood activities, Isabella and Sophia had taught themselves to read at age 3, mastered basic mathematics at 5, and by their 6th year were engaging in logical discussions that could challenge experienced mining engineers. But perhaps most alarmingly was their growing awareness of their parents' true nature and activities. The twins had been isolated in the cabin their entire lives, officially to protect them from vicious rumors and superstitious fears, but in reality, to prevent anyone from witnessing their condition and connecting it to a gold curse brought upon their parents' crimes. However, this isolation gave them unprecedented access to their parents' private conversations, business records, and planning sessions for their various criminal activities. Isabella and Sophia had developed an uncanny ability to remain silent and still when adults were near, leading Elias and Miriam to feel comfortable discussing sensitive matters in their presence, assuming the children were too young or too disabled to understand what they were hearing. This assumption would prove to be a fatal mistake that would ultimately lead to the siblings' destruction. By 1868, the twins possessed detailed knowledge of their parents' mine exorcism operations, including specific information about fabricated evidence, bribed witnesses, and the systematic murder of innocent people for their property. More importantly, they had begun to understand that their own physical condition was not the result of a supernatural curse, but a direct consequence of their parents' decision to marry within their own bloodline to protect their criminal empire. This understanding filled the children with a mixture of anger, grief, and a determination that was staggering in its intensity and sophistication. Though physically constrained and entirely dependent on their parents for basic care, Isabella and Sophia began plotting to expose the truth about the Hawthorne criminal enterprise and bring justice to their parents' victims. The twins' first opportunity to act on their knowledge came in the summer of 1868, when a young woman named Hannah Riley arrived at the house seeking employment as a servant. Hannah was the daughter of one of Elias and Miriam's earlier victims, a gold miner named Seamus Riley, who had been executed for consorting with mine devils in 1855 after the siblings orchestrated his accusation to seize his prosperous gold mine. Hannah had no idea that the Hawthornes were responsible for her father's death. She only knew they were wealthy, influential members of the community who could provide employment for a young woman reduced to poverty by family tragedy. What she discovered during her time in the cabin, however, was the evidence that would ultimately lead to the greatest fraud scandal in the history of the California Gold Rush. The twins' strategy for communicating with Hannah was both brilliant and heartbreaking. Though afflicted with severe speech impediments and physical limitations, they developed a way to leave handwritten messages in places she would find during her cleaning duties. These messages began simply with basic information about hidden documents and suspicious financial records, but gradually expanded to include detailed instructions on where to find evidence of their parents' crimes. More importantly, Isabella and Sophia had learned to distinguish their parents' various visitors and developed a way to warn Hannah when particularly dangerous individuals were expected at the house. They had observed enough of their parents' activities to understand that some of their associates were even more violent and unpredictable than Elias and Miriam, and they used their intimate knowledge of appointments and meetings to help Hannah avoid potentially deadly encounters. The turning point came in September 1868 when the twins provided Hannah with specific information about where their parents kept their most incriminating records. A secret compartment behind a false wall in Elias's study contained the financial ledgers detailing 16 years of criminal activity. These ledgers included not only records of the payments received for each exorcism, but also detailed lists of the confiscated gold mines, their estimated values, and notes on the costs of bribes and witness fees, revealing the systematic nature of their operations. Hannah's discovery of these records provided her with irrefutable proof that the Hawthorne siblings had been murdering innocent people for money, but it also placed her in mortal danger. She understood that if Elias and Miriam discovered her knowledge, they would not hesitate to eliminate her using the same methods they had perfected against their other victims. Her only hope lay in finding a way to expose their crimes while protecting herself and the twins from retribution. The solution she ultimately chose demonstrated both courage and a strategic mindset that would have impressed even experienced criminal investigators. Instead of trying to flee with the evidence or confront the siblings directly, Hannah began secretly copying the most incriminating documents while establishing contact with Father Francis O'Malley, a newly arrived Irish Catholic priest in San Francisco who possessed both the theological knowledge to understand the population's superstitions and the political connections to investigate powerful figures. Father Francis O'Malley's investigation into the Hawthorne siblings began with skepticism, but quickly grew into horror as he uncovered layer upon layer of systematic evil that had operated almost unchecked for nearly 2 decades. Hannah's initial approach to the priest had been cautious and indirect, as she understood that direct accusations against such powerful and influential figures would most likely lead to her own destruction. But the evidence Hannah gradually shared with Father O'Malley, copies of financial ledgers, witness lists with notes on payments and threats, and most damningly, detailed maps marking the locations of confiscated gold mines and their current ownership, painted a picture of a criminal enterprise that exceeded even the priest's worst expectations of human capacity for evil. Father O'Malley's expertise in both theology and human nature made him uniquely qualified to understand the full implications of what Hannah had discovered. Unlike local sheriffs who might have been bribed or dismissed the accusations as superstitious nonsense, the priest possessed the knowledge and authority to investigate both the criminal and moral aspects of the Hawthorne case. His decision to visit the cabin in October 1868 was presented to the siblings as a routine pastoral call. The priest was seeking to introduce himself to prominent members of the community and offer spiritual guidance to a family that, according to rumor, had suffered the tragedy of difficult births. Elias and Miriam, confident in their ability to manipulate religious authorities, welcomed the visit as an opportunity to further legitimize their standing in the community, while also gathering intelligence on potential threats to their operations. What they did not anticipate was Father O'Malley's specialized training in recognizing deception and his expertise in identifying the psychological and spiritual consequences of systematic evil. Within minutes of entering the house, the priest detected a suffocating atmosphere that suggested the presence of deep spiritual corruption, not a supernatural curse, but the psychological residue left by decades of calculated murder and moral decay. The priest's request to see the children was ostensibly motivated by pastoral concern for young souls coping with physical challenges, but his true purpose was to assess whether Isabella and Sophia possessed the intelligence and awareness necessary to serve as witnesses against their parents. Hannah's written reports had suggested that the twins understood far more about their situation than their parents realized, but Father O'Malley needed to assess their capabilities for himself before endangering their safety by involving them in his investigation. When Father O'Malley was finally admitted to the children's room, what he encountered there went far beyond even Hannah's detailed descriptions of their combination of tragedy and capability. Isabella and Sophia, despite their severe physical limitations and obvious daily pain, displayed an intellectual sophistication and emotional maturity that was remarkable for children of any age, let alone those who had been isolated from normal social interaction for their entire lives. More importantly, the twins showed no fear of the priest despite never having met him before, and instead displayed what could only be described as relief and hope. It was clear they had been waiting for someone with the authority and courage to challenge their parents, and they immediately began trying to communicate information about the crimes they had witnessed and the evidence they had observed being hidden or destroyed. Father O'Malley's theological training had included instruction in ministering to victims of extreme cruelty, and he recognized in these children the same combination of suffering, awareness, and desperate hope he had observed in survivors of persecution. But unlike in previous cases, where the victims had been adults capable of explaining their circumstances and seeking justice, Isabella and Sophia were trapped by their physical limitations and their complete dependence on the very people responsible for both their condition and their suffering. The priest's departure from the cabin was outwardly cordial, but all parties understood that a fundamental confrontation had begun. Father O'Malley had seen enough to confirm his worst suspicions about the children's situation and their parents' character, while Elias and Miriam had recognized in his demeanor and questions a level of perception and determination that posed an unprecedented danger to their carefully constructed lives. The investigation Father O'Malley launched upon his return to San Francisco was methodical, comprehensive, and conducted with the full resources of the Catholic Church's administrative and intelligence networks. Unlike the loose legal systems of the gold mining towns, the Church possessed sophisticated methods for gathering evidence, analyzing testimony, and building cases against powerful individuals who believed themselves to be above justice. Within 3 weeks, Father O'Malley had assembled a complete dossier on the Hawthorne siblings' activities, including financial records subpoenaed from banks in Sacramento, a testimony from the surviving relatives of their victims, and most damningly, a detailed confession from Caleb Vance, a former accomplice who had helped plant evidence and coach witnesses in several of the mine exorcisms in exchange for a share of the gold and protection from his own legal troubles. Caleb Vance's confession revealed the true scale of the Hawthorne criminal enterprise, including details on their methods for selecting victims, creating false evidence, and coordinating with corrupt sheriffs to ensure favorable legal outcomes. But more importantly for Father O'Malley's purposes, Vance's testimony included specific information about the siblings' decision to marry and their explicit discussions about using their children's condition to further expand their fortune through private exhibitions for wealthy individuals curious about medical oddities. This discovery added another layer of horror to a case that was already almost too much to bear. Elias and Miriam had not only condemned innocent people to death for financial gain, but they had produced children through an incestuous union specifically designed to protect their criminal empire. And now they were planning to exploit their children's suffering for additional profit. But Father O'Malley's most powerful weapon in his campaign against the Hawthorne siblings turned out to be the children themselves. Isabella and Sophia, despite their youth and physical limitations, possessed detailed memories of conversations and events that provided crucial corroboration for the evidence found in their parents' records. More importantly, their obvious intelligence and moral awareness made them compelling witnesses whose testimony could not be dismissed as the fantasies of damaged minds. The priest's careful interviews with the twins, conducted during clandestine visits arranged by Hannah Riley, revealed a level of systematic abuse and exploitation that went far beyond mere neglect. Elias and Miriam had not only hidden their children from the world to protect their own reputations, but they had used the twins' isolation and dependence to conduct psychological experiments designed to test the limits of human endurance and adaptability. Isabella and Sophia described years of enduring painful medical procedures without anesthesia, being forced to perform intellectual tasks under the threat of having food or comfort withheld, and being used as subjects for their parents' theories about the relationship between physical deformity and mental capacity. Most horrifically, they revealed that their parents had been systematically documenting their development and behavior with the intention of selling detailed reports to European physicians interested in the effects of inbreeding on human subjects. The final months of 1868 brought escalating tension to the Hawthorne cabin as multiple forces converged to threaten the empire the siblings had so carefully built on blood and deception. Father O'Malley's investigation had reached the point where he possessed irrefutable evidence of their crimes, but he faced the delicate challenge of exposing such powerful and dangerous individuals without provoking a violent reaction that could endanger the children and other potential witnesses. Meanwhile, Isabella and Sophia were growing bolder in their efforts to assist in their parents' downfall, using their privileged position as isolated patients to observe and document activities that not even Hannah Riley could safely witness. The twins had developed sophisticated methods for recording information despite their physical limitations, creating hidden caches of evidence that detailed their parents' ongoing criminal activities and future plans. The children's growing defiance did not escape their parents' notice, who had begun to suspect that their offspring possessed more awareness and capability than they had previously realized. Elias and Miriam's response to this suspicion revealed the complete absence of natural parental affection that had characterized their relationship with the twins since birth. Instead of feeling pride in their children's intelligence or concern for their well-being, the siblings viewed Isabella and Sophia's developing autonomy as a potential threat to their security. The crisis that would finally bring the entire criminal enterprise crashing down began in early December 1868, when Elias discovered evidence that someone had been accessing his secret financial records. Scratches on the false wall panels, the hidden hinges, and disturbed dust patterns on the documents indicated repeated unauthorized entry into his most sensitive files. Even more alarming was the realization that whoever had gained access possessed enough knowledge to identify the most incriminating documents. Pages containing direct references to bribery, witness intimidation, and mine ownership fraud had been subtly marked with tiny pencil dots that would have been invisible on casual inspection but clearly indicated systematic study. Elias's immediate suspicion fell on Hannah Riley, whose position as a servant in the house provided her with both the opportunity and motive to spy on her employers. But when he and Miriam brutally interrogated Hannah using techniques they had perfected in their exorcism career, they discovered that while she was indeed knowledgeable about their crimes, she could not possibly have been responsible for all the security breaches they had discovered. The truth that their own children had been quietly gathering evidence against them for months was so far outside their psychological framework that neither sibling initially considered the possibility. They had grown so accustomed to viewing Isabella and Sophia as helpless dependents whose physical limitations rendered them harmless that they were incapable of imagining the twins as active threats to their security. This blindness to their children's capabilities proved to be a fatal miscalculation that would ultimately cost them everything they had worked to build. While Elias and Miriam focused their suspicions on external threats like Hannah Riley and Father O'Malley, Isabella and Sophia continued their intelligence-gathering operations with increasing sophistication and daring. The twins had developed communication methods that allowed them to coordinate their efforts despite being physically separated for most of their daily activities. They used a combination of handwritten messages, coded sounds, and even the manipulation of household objects to share information and plan their next moves. Their physical limitations, which their parents viewed as a guarantee of their helplessness, had actually forced them to develop intellectual and observational skills that far exceeded those of normal children their age. By mid-December 1868, Isabella and Sophia had gathered evidence that included not only documentation of their parents' past crimes, but also detailed intelligence on their planned future operations. They had learned that Elias and Miriam were preparing to expand their operations into the Arizona Territory, where conflicts with the Apache had created community tensions that could be exploited for profit through accusations of supernatural collaboration with hostile forces. More immediately threatening was the twins' discovery that their parents had begun planning to eliminate them as potential witnesses and security risks. Isabella and Sophia had overheard discussions about the tragic accidents that could befall disabled children during the harsh winter months, and they had observed their parents making preparations that suggested an intention to dispose of them before spring. The children's response to this threat demonstrated both their extraordinary intelligence and their profound understanding of their parents' psychology. Instead of attempting to flee or simply alerting Father O'Malley to the immediate danger, Isabella and Sophia chose to accelerate their evidence-gathering activities while also laying the groundwork for a final confrontation that would expose the full extent of their parents' crimes. Their plan was both subtle and terrifying in its sophistication. They would use their parents' own methods against them, staging a scenario that would force Elias and Miriam to reveal their true nature in the presence of witnesses with the authority and credibility to ensure justice. The twins understood that their physical condition made it unlikely they would survive any direct conflict with their parents, but they were willing to sacrifice themselves if their deaths could guarantee the exposure of the crimes that had cost dozens of innocent people their lives. The opportunity they had been waiting for arrived on the 21st of December, 1868. It was the 10th anniversary of their parents' secret wedding, and a day that Elias and Miriam always marked with private celebrations that revealed their true characters more clearly than any other occasion. This annual ritual, which the siblings viewed as a commemoration of their successful partnership in crime, provided Isabella and Sophia with the perfect setting for their final gambit. Just when we thought we had seen it all, the horror in the Hawthorne cabin deepens. If this story is sending shivers down your spine, share this video with a friend who loves a dark mystery. Hit that like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a story like this. Let's find out together what happens next. The twins' plan required precise timing, absolute commitment, and a level of courage that would have been remarkable in adults, let alone in children who had never known life outside the walls of their prison home. But Isabella and Sophia understood that they possessed something their parents had never anticipated: the moral clarity that comes from enduring injustice and the intellectual capacity to turn that clarity into effective action. The events of the 21st of December 1868 unfolded with a precision that reflected months of careful planning by two 8-year-old children who had never experienced a normal childhood, but had instead been forced to develop the strategic thinking of seasoned investigators. Isabella and Sophia's plan depended on their intimate knowledge of their parents' habits, personalities, and criminal methods, combined with their unique position as witnesses whom Elias and Miriam consistently underestimated. The twins had arranged for Father O'Malley to arrive at the cabin in the evening when their parents typically held their anniversary celebration, a private ritual that included reviewing their accumulated assets, reading selected passages from their list of victims, and planning future operations. This celebration, which the siblings believed to be completely secret, actually took place in a room directly above the children's quarters, and Isabella and Sophia had been listening to these annual recitations of crime for years. The atmosphere in the cabin that dark December evening was thick with a sense of almost palpable menace as Elias and Miriam prepared for their 10th anniversary celebration. The siblings had spent the day reviewing financial records and preparing documents for what they intended to be their last winter in California before relocating their operations to the more lucrative and less scrutinized territories of Arizona. They had begun liquidating some of their California gold mines and were preparing to establish new identities that would allow them to continue their criminal work in regions where their reputations had not yet preceded them. Isabella and Sophia, confined to their room as was customary during their parents' private meetings, had spent weeks preparing for this night with the methodical precision of experienced conspirators. Despite their physical limitations, they had managed to create multiple hidden caches of evidence throughout the house, including copies of their parents' most incriminating documents, detailed maps of confiscated gold mines, and written testimonies describing specific crimes they had witnessed or overheard being planned. More importantly, the twins had spent months weakening specific structural elements of the cabin, using tools they had fashioned from mining implements and techniques they had learned by studying engineering books from their parents' library. Their plan required not only perfect timing, but also an understanding of physics and engineering that would have challenged adult builders. Yet, they had mastered these concepts purely out of necessity and their desperate determination to escape their prison. Father O'Malley's arrival at the cabin was preceded by a careful reconnaissance he had conducted over several weeks, during which he had mapped the layout of the building, identified potential escape routes, and established communication protocols with Isabella and Sophia through a system of light signals visible from their bedroom window. The priest's military background, he had served in the British Army before joining the church, had provided him with invaluable tactical knowledge in planning what was essentially a rescue mission disguised as a pastoral visit. The authorities accompanying Father O'Malley included not only the local sheriff with an arrest warrant, but also doctors prepared to examine and treat the Hawthorne children, legal clerks ready to catalog evidence, and even a skilled mining engineer whose expertise would be necessary to safely extricate the victims from what promised to be a dangerous confrontation. This level of preparation reflected the priest's understanding that they would have only one opportunity to expose the Hawthornes' crimes before the siblings either fled or eliminated all witnesses to their activities. When Father O'Malley knocked on the cabin's front door at precisely 7 p.m. that evening, Elias and Miriam were in the middle of their anniversary ritual, surrounded by evidence that would have made denial impossible, even if they had been inclined toward honesty. The siblings' initial reaction to the unexpected visit was a combination of confidence and annoyance. They had successfully deflected official inquiries for nearly 20 years and saw no reason why this occasion should be any different. But as Father O'Malley explained his ostensible purpose, concern for Hannah Riley's well-being and a desire to offer spiritual guidance to the family during the difficult winter, both Elias and Miriam began to sense that something was fundamentally different about this visitor. The priest's demeanor was too confident, his questions too specific, and his knowledge of their household arrangements too detailed for a routine pastoral call. The decisive moment came when Father O'Malley asked permission to see Isabella and Sophia, ostensibly to offer a prayer for their health and comfort. The siblings' immediate instinct was to refuse this request with their usual explanations about the children's fragile condition and susceptibility to excitement, but they recognized that such a refusal might itself seem suspicious to someone who was clearly paying closer attention than previous visitors. The decision to admit Father O'Malley to the children's room proved to be the fatal mistake that would destroy everything they had built over 2 decades of systematic murder and fraud. When the priest entered the twins' room, followed by Elias and Miriam, who were intent on monitoring the conversation, he immediately executed the signal system he and the children had prearranged. Isabella and Sophia's response was immediate and devastating. Despite the presence of their parents, the twins began to recount in meticulous detail specific crimes they had witnessed, complete with dates, victim names, and descriptions of where evidence was located. Their voices, though distorted by their physical conditions, carried an authority and precision that made their testimony undeniably credible. On the night of the 8th of May, 1855, Isabella began, her words carefully articulated despite the effort required. Our father and mother met Caleb Vance in the cellar to plan the accusation of Seamus Riley. Mother gave Vance a small bag of gold taken from Jacob Miller's mine, and father gave him detailed instructions on where to hide the animal bones that would be discovered during the search of Mr. Riley's shanty. Sophia continued the relentless narrative, demonstrating the coordinated preparation that made their testimony so devastating. Those bones were arranged in a demonic pattern that our parents invented. Vance was instructed to place them under the loose floorboards in Mr. Riley's shanty, where they would be found by witnesses who had been told exactly where to look. The psychological impact of hearing their most carefully guarded secrets recited by their own children in the presence of a priest who clearly had the authority to act on such testimony shattered Elias and Miriam's composure. For the first time in their criminal careers, they found themselves completely unprepared for a threat they had never anticipated. The betrayal by victims they had assumed to be helpless and ignorant, but the twins were far from finished with their revelations. Isabella and Sophia had spent years memorizing not only their parents' past crimes, but also their current operations and future plans. They described hidden caches of stolen gold and property, detailed the bribery networks that had protected their parents from investigation, and most damningly, revealed the existence of other victims whose deaths had been so successfully disguised as mining accidents that the authorities had never suspected foul play. In the chest under the floorboards of the east corner of the study, Sophia continued, her voice growing stronger as she realized that rescue had finally arrived. There are 12 small bags of gold taken from the mines of executed prospectors, including the pocket watch of Mr. Thomas Ballard, who was hanged for mine cursing in 1863 after father accused him of causing a cave-in, Isabella picked up the story seamlessly. Mr. Thomas Ballard was innocent of all charges. Father deliberately weakened the timber supports in his mine shaft, then claimed the resulting collapse was evidence of supernatural intervention. Mr. Ballard's gold mine, including the water rights to the nearby creek, was divided between the sheriff's office and our parents as payment for identifying the cursed. The detailed precision of the children's testimony, combined with their obvious intelligence and the physical evidence of their horrific condition, created an overwhelming case that no rational observer could dismiss or explain away. Father O'Malley had brought with him not only the authority to investigate the Hawthorns' crimes, but also credible witnesses who were above suspicion and documentation methods that would preserve every word of the twins' revelations. Elias and Miriam's reaction to this devastating exposure revealed the complete absence of natural human emotion that had characterized their entire criminal enterprise. Instead of displaying shock, remorse, or even fear for their children's safety, the siblings immediately began calculating how to eliminate the witnesses and escape the consequences of their crimes. Their first attempt at damage control involved trying to discredit Isabella and Sophia's testimony by claiming the children were delusional as a result of their physical conditions. But this strategy collapsed when Father O'Malley produced copies of documents that corroborated every detail the twins had provided, along with testimony from other witnesses who independently confirmed specific elements of their account. Realizing that denial was impossible and that their criminal enterprise was about to be completely exposed, Elias and Miriam executed the contingency plan they had developed for precisely this scenario. Hidden throughout the cabin were weapons, escape routes, and emergency funds that would allow them to eliminate all witnesses and flee to territories beyond the reach of the law. The violence that followed was swift and brutal, but it unfolded exactly as Isabella and Sophia had anticipated and planned for. The twins had spent months studying their parents' emergency procedures and had developed countermeasures designed to protect their rescuers while ensuring that Elias and Miriam could not escape justice. When Elias drew a concealed pistol and attempted to shoot Father O'Malley, he discovered that the weapon's firing mechanism had been subtly sabotaged with small pieces of ore that Isabella had been patiently inserting into the barrel for weeks. The gun exploded in his hand, inflicting severe injuries that rendered him unable to continue the fight. Miriam's attempt to use a hidden knife against the sheriff was thwarted when she triggered one of the floor traps Sophia had prepared by loosening specific floorboards in strategic locations. Her fall not only incapacitated her but also triggered a series of mechanical devices the twins had constructed to block doors and windows, preventing any possibility of escape. The final confrontation took place in the main hall of the house, where the structural modifications Isabella and Sophia had been making for months finally served their purpose. The twins had calculated the precise amount of damage required to render specific sections of the building unstable while leaving safe passages for their intended rescuers. When Elias and Miriam realized that their escape routes were blocked and their weapons were useless, they made one last desperate attempt to silence their children permanently. But Isabella and Sophia had anticipated this reaction and had prepared their final defense, a coordinated collapse of the house's central support structure that would trap their parents while creating a protective shelter around themselves and their rescuers. The twins' engineering calculations proved to be astonishingly accurate. The building's collapse occurred exactly as they had planned, creating a field of debris that pinned Elias and Miriam under heavy timbers while leaving Isabella, Sophia, Father O'Malley, and the officials in a protected alcove that remained structurally intact. The physical destruction of the cabin served multiple purposes beyond simply thwarting the siblings' escape attempt. The collapse exposed hidden rooms and secret storage areas that contained additional evidence of their crimes, including preserved documents, stolen gold and property, and even the remains of victims whose deaths had never been officially recorded. Most importantly, the destruction of the building that had served as both a prison and a torture chamber for Isabella and Sophia represented a symbolic end to their confinement and the beginning of their liberation. The twins had literally brought down the walls that had held them captive for 8 years, using their intelligence and determination to turn their physical limitations into strategic advantages. When rescue workers finally cleared enough debris to reach the survivors, they found a scene that perfectly illustrated the moral dimensions of the Hawthorne case. Elias and Miriam lay dead in the wreckage, their faces frozen in the shock and disbelief of criminals who had never imagined their own children could orchestrate their downfall. Isabella and Sophia, though injured and exhausted, were alive and eager to continue providing the testimony that would expose the full extent of their parents' criminal enterprise. The twins' survival and their obvious intelligence made them compelling witnesses whose testimony would prove crucial in the legal proceedings that followed. But more importantly, their courage in exposing their parents' crimes despite the immense personal risk demonstrated that physical limitations need not inhibit moral agency or the pursuit of justice. The aftermath of the Hawthorne cabin's collapse sent shockwaves through California, influencing land law, community trust, and vigilance against greed for generations to come. The detailed evidence recovered from the rubble, combined with the comprehensive testimony of Isabella and Sophia, provided irrefutable proof of systematic murder for profit, forcing authorities to confront the terrifying possibility that other gold curse accusations may have been similarly corrupted by greed and manipulation. The immediate legal consequences were unprecedented in their scope and severity. Within days of the house's destruction, the court issued posthumous convictions against Elias and Miriam Hawthorne on 62 counts of murder, along with numerous additional charges related to fraud, bribery, and conspiracy. The evidence was so overwhelming and the crimes so extensive that legal scholars would later cite the Hawthorne case as the most comprehensive criminal prosecution in the history of the California gold rush. But the legal ramifications extended far beyond the posthumous punishment of two deceased criminals. The systematic nature of the Hawthorne's crimes, combined with evidence of their connections to corrupt officials, triggered a comprehensive review of property confiscation procedures, revealing disturbing patterns of abuse and manipulation in mining communities across the West. Father Francis O'Malley's investigation had uncovered not only the Hawthorne's crimes, but also evidence that similar schemes had been operating in other regions, suggesting that the abuse of superstitious fears for financial gain was far more common than authorities had previously suspected. This discovery contributed to a growing skepticism about mine curses and helped to accelerate legal reforms. The financial empire built on blood money was systematically dismantled over a period of 3 years, requiring the creation of special legal procedures to handle the complexity of unraveling decades of fraudulent property acquisitions. Assets worth more than $30,000 were identified as having been obtained through criminal means, and the courts faced the unprecedented challenge of returning stolen property to the families of victims who had been murdered decades earlier. The process of financial restitution revealed the true scale of the Hawthorne's operations and provided further evidence of their systematic approach to crime. The detailed records recovered from the house's ruins showed that the siblings had maintained meticulous documentation of their activities, including maps of confiscated gold mines, lists of bribed officials, and even financial projections for the future criminal enterprises they had planned to establish in Arizona. Isabella and Sophia Hawthorne, despite the circumstances of their birth and their horrific childhood, proved to be far more resilient than anyone had expected. Under the careful supervision of Dr. Arthur Chen, a physician from San Francisco who took a special interest in their case, they not only survived their ordeal, but began to thrive in ways that challenged contemporary understandings of human development and adaptation. Dr. Chen's initial examination of the twins revealed that their physical conditions, while severe, were not as limiting as their parents had claimed. Much of their apparent helplessness had been artificially imposed through deliberate neglect and psychological manipulation designed to keep them dependent and controllable. With proper medical care, nutrition, and physical therapy, Isabella and Sophia showed remarkable improvement in their mobility and overall health. More importantly, their intellectual capabilities, which had been evident since early childhood, flourished once they were finally provided with proper education and social interaction. Within months of their rescue, the twins were reading at a level that surpassed most adults, demonstrating a mathematical aptitude that impressed scholars at the newly established university and revealing a literary talent that captured the attention of intellectuals across California. Dr. Chen's detailed documentation of their progress became foundational texts in the field of medicine, demonstrating that intellectual capacity was not determined by physical appearance or condition. His reports challenged prevailing assumptions about disability and intelligence, showing that proper care and education could unlock extraordinary potential even in the most challenging circumstances. The twins' testimony continued to play a crucial role in the legal proceedings that followed their rescue. Their detailed memories of their parents' conversations and activities provided corroborating evidence for the documents and helped prosecutors build cases against the dozens of surviving accomplices who had enabled the Hawthorne's crimes for years. But perhaps more importantly, their obvious intelligence and moral clarity made them compelling witnesses whose accounts could not be dismissed as fantasy or fabrication. The psychological evaluations of Isabella and Sophia conducted by Dr. Chen and his colleagues showed none of the signs of mental impairment that might have been expected from their traumatic childhood experiences. Despite enduring years of isolation, abuse, and psychological manipulation, the twins displayed remarkable emotional stability and moral development, suggesting an innate resilience that had protected them from the worst effects of their ordeal. This resilience proved crucial as Isabella and Sophia adapted to life outside their prison home and began to interact with the wider community. Their physical conditions made them objects of curiosity and sometimes fear, but their intelligence and dignity quickly won the respect of those who took the time to know them as individuals rather than just medical oddities. This shift in public perception of the twins became a powerful argument for the inclusion and education of individuals with physical differences. Isabella and Sophia's success in overcoming their circumstances provided evidence that human potential could not be judged by appearance and that society benefited when all individuals were given the opportunity to contribute their talents and insights. Their adult lives were as remarkable as their childhood ordeal had been tragic. Isabella developed into a respected investigative journalist whose writings on land fraud, witness protection, and government corruption influenced the development of California law for decades. Despite her physical limitations, she became a sought-after voice in complex cases and helped to establish the first procedures for protecting whistleblowers in legal proceedings. Isabella's innovations were directly influenced by her childhood experiences and her understanding of how vulnerable individuals could be exploited by those in power. Her work led to increased oversight of land transactions, better protections for witnesses in criminal cases, and improved methods for gathering and preserving testimony from marginalized populations. Sophia channeled her experiences into becoming a physician, specializing in the care of children with congenital deformities and the victims of abuse. Her approach to medical practice was revolutionary in its emphasis on treating patients as whole human beings rather than just a collection of symptoms, and her therapeutic methods stressed dignity, education, and social integration rather than isolation and shame. Dr. Sophia Hawthorne, as she became known in the medical community, founded the first hospital in California specifically designed to educate and treat disabled children. Her facility demonstrated that physical limitations need not inhibit intellectual achievement and that proper support and education could help individuals with a wide range of conditions make meaningful contributions to society. The hospital's success challenged prevailing attitudes about disability and education throughout the West, inspiring the creation of similar facilities and contributing to broader societal changes in how communities treated their most vulnerable members. Sophia's philosophy emphasized the potential within every individual and the responsibility of society to provide opportunities for that potential to be realized. Both twins married and raised families of their own. Their children showed no trace of their grandparents' moral corruption or their parents' physical challenges. The genetic abnormalities caused by Elias and Miriam's incestuous union proved to be non-hereditary, allowing Isabella and Sophia to break the cycle of suffering that had defined their early years. The twins' success in creating loving, stable families was particularly significant given their traumatic childhood experiences. Their ability to form healthy relationships and raise well-adjusted children demonstrated that even the earliest and most severe traumas do not have to determine the entire course of a life when proper support and intervention are available. The Hawthorne case had profound implications for the understanding of family dynamics, child development, and the long-term effects of abuse. Isabella and Sophia's recovery and later achievements became powerful evidence that resilience and healing were possible even in the most extreme circumstances, provided that victims received appropriate care and support. The investigation led by Father O'Malley also had lasting effects on religious and legal institutions throughout the American West. The priest's methods for gathering evidence, protecting witnesses, and building cases against powerful criminals became a model for future investigations and helped to establish procedures that influenced law enforcement for generations. Father O'Malley's detailed documentation of the Hawthorne case became required reading for legal scholars and religious authorities, demonstrating how systematic evil can flourish when communities fail to maintain proper oversight of their institutions and leaders. His work contributed to reforms in both civil and religious governance, strengthening safeguards against the abuse of power. The site of the Hawthorne cabin was designated by the state as a memorial. Its ruins were left undisturbed as a reminder of how easily justice can be corrupted when communities allow greed and superstition to overwhelm critical thinking and moral courage. The memorial, maintained by funds established through the sale of the Hawthorne's confiscated assets, served as an educational site where visitors could learn about the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of protecting vulnerable community members. The simple stone that still stands today bears not only the date of the siblings' deaths, but also an inscription commissioned by Isabella and Sophia. Here lies proof that evil is not supernatural, it is a human choice, made by ordinary people who value wealth over conscience. Let all who pass remember that justice depends on the courage of those who refuse to remain silent in the face of wrongdoing. Perhaps most importantly, the Hawthorne case demonstrated that children, regardless of their physical condition or social status, possess an innate dignity and moral capacity that must be respected and protected. Isabella and Sophia's courage in exposing their parents' crimes, despite their complete dependence on those same people for their survival, challenged contemporary assumptions about childhood disability and moral responsibility. Their story became a powerful argument for the rights and protection of children, influencing legal and social developments throughout American history. The recognition that children could be both victims of abuse and agents of their own liberation contributed to evolving concepts of childhood that emphasized protection, education, and respect for individual dignity. The twins' legacy extended beyond their immediate historical context to influence broader discussions about disability rights, victim advocacy, and the prevention of systematic abuse. Their demonstration that physical limitations need not inhibit intellectual or moral development challenged prejudices that had existed for centuries and contributed to more inclusive concepts of human potential and social responsibility. The Hawthorne case continues to resonate in contemporary discussions about child protection, disability rights, and the prevention of institutional abuse. Isabella and Sophia's story demonstrates that individuals are capable of astonishing resilience and moral clarity when given the tools and support needed to overcome adversity, regardless of their physical conditions or traumatic experiences. Their ultimate victory over seemingly insurmountable circumstances serves as an enduring testament to the fact that human dignity cannot be destroyed by abuse or neglect, and that society has both the opportunity and the obligation to support all individuals in realizing their potential for contribution and achievement. This mystery shows us how communities can become complicit in evil when greed and superstition overwhelm critical thinking and moral courage. The Hawthorne siblings succeeded for nearly 2 decades, not because they were supernatural monsters, but because they understood how to exploit human weakness and turn neighbors against each other for profit. Their ultimate downfall came not from divine intervention, but from the determination of brave individuals who refused to remain silent in the face of injustice. What do you think about this story? Do you believe there could have been other mind exorcists throughout the Wild West who carried out similar schemes, using supernatural fears to cover up systematic murder for profit? Leave your comments below with your theories on how many other gold curses might have actually been calculated crimes. If you enjoyed this story and want more historical horrors like it, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this with someone who loves a good mystery about the dark side of American history. See you in the next video, where we'll explore another case of frontier evil that most people would rather forget.